Good afternoon and welcome to Markets Today. I'm your host, Mbithe. Now, it's Wednesday, and you know what happens on Wednesday? We give you an overview of what's happening in other sub-Saharan Africa capital markets. We will be looking at what's happening in Nigeria, what's happening in Ghana, in Egypt, as well as in Kenya. But over and above that, today we want to take a deep dive and get a practitioner's perspective on what's happening in the telecom sector. To help us with this conversation is Mr. Chris Senanu. He is the Managing Director of the Enterprise Division at Telecom Kenya. This conversation, we will be having it after the break. We come back to the capital markets. So Nigeria, everybody has been saying that the Kenyan market is on a 10-year low. But get this, 75% of the stocks that are listed in Nigeria are trading at their worst price over the last decade. Investors are actually getting out of equity markets and the bond markets there, largely because of declining returns. So it's becoming very hard to actually get some positive returns in that market. We've also been looking at the banks in Kenya and seeing double-digit numbers from some and single-digit growth numbers from others. In Nigeria, over the last couple of days, Zenith and GTB Bank, the largest banks in Nigeria, announced their first half numbers. Guarantee Trust Bank, numbers were up 4%. Very weak numbers there, nothing in terms of total income growth, that was minus 2%. They were actually able to deliver 4% on efficiency gains. Their balance sheet did not grow. Zenith Bank, 8.74% growth on profit after tax. Very strong numbers there. Now, what's interesting is looking at the top banks in Nigeria vis-a-vis the top banks in Kenya. The top banks in Kenya are not growing their balance sheet, and they've been recording single-digit growth numbers for the first half year. So it looks like this is not peculiar territory for banks because Nigeria is actually reporting the same thing. The final thing that's happening in Nigeria, we have been seeing a bit of weakness on the currency, especially on the importers and the exporters window. About 1 percentage point decline over the last 1 month, and there's a bit of increasing dollar tightening in that space. And this is largely because of foreign investor outflows from the equity markets and the debt markets. So anytime you're looking at the NSE and you're thinking the NSE is not doing too well, remember, the Nigeria Stock Exchange has 75% of its stocks doing their worst over the last decade. Let's move over to Ghana. Ghana, last week, the central bank there actually passed a directive to close a couple of the financial participants in the market. The focus was on the savings and loans companies. Now, this could see about 4,000 people lose their jobs. This is coming off the back of a program that has been triggered to actually clean up the financial sector, looking at the banks, looking at the funding the finance houses there, the mortgage lenders there, as well as the savings and loans. It's a very drastic move. It wasn't necessarily expected, but it feels like it's actually coming to the culmination. The valuations of the banks there have actually been trading on year lows, and we're not seeing too much inflows with regards to foreign investors. Again, it's important to always compare what's happening in these markets vis-a-vis what's happening in Kenya. Kenya, we've had layoffs from the banking sector. They haven't even gotten to 1,000. But Ghana, in 1 week alone, will expect to see about 4,000 people lose their jobs. Not positive news for any investor who's looking there. Final news when you're looking at the continent, Egypt. Tomorrow, the central bank will be holding its MPC meeting to decide on the overnight lending rate. The analysts in that country actually expect a 1 percentage point decline, largely because the last reported inflation numbers came in below expectation. The inflation rate is about 8.7% now. The macros are all looking positive, and we are seeing a lot of investments getting into that country, especially in the debt market. Now, the debt market is about 30% owned by foreigners. So everybody will be looking to see what actually happens to this rate and whether the low inflation trajectory is sustainable, because this is coming off the fact that the government actually instigated brought fuel subsidies into the market, and this reduced the inflation rates in that market. Now, circling back into Kenya, today the NSE had a first half-year review on what has been happening on the market. Certainly, the revenues have been down. We were at 78 billion for the first half of this year. Not anything compared to what we were doing last year, which was about 134 billion shillings for January up until June. But the NSE directors and the NSE CEO think there's actually some potential for an upside and maybe a short-lived rally on the stock exchange, because we're on a 10-year low with regards to the NSE 20 index. And we're also trading on a price to equity multiple of 10 times. It's been a long time coming, seeing 10 times. We've always been at about 13 to 14 times. He thinks that the attraction to the stock exchange is largely going to be driven by dividend yields and cheap valuations. I'm not too sure if you agree with that or you don't agree with that. But what we know for sure is that investors are actually trickling into the private equity space, we did see about $1.1 billion get into that space in the first half of the year. This compares to about 780 million shillings, dollars that came into the NSE. So you can actually see where people are putting their money and where they're looking to get a return. Over and above that, the final and the most interesting thing that we had from the NSA this morning is that there's actually a framework that's about to come out through the Africa Development Bank with reference to linking the African stock exchanges. This is very important for you as an investor, because once the exchanges are linked, then you can actually go to one broker and be able to trade into the Nigerian Stock Exchange, Egypt Stock Exchange. You can trade shares in Mauritius, you can trade shares in the BRVM region, as well as Kenya and the regions around it, the East African community. It's fantastic news, not yet there, only the framework has come in place. But then the most important thing that we had is, once the NSE has a new system in place, you'll actually go from trading your trade transactions in 3 days and go to a real-time settlement cycle. That'll be very exciting. You buy stocks today, you buy your Safaricom today, and you can be able to sell it again tomorrow. Very exciting news. The final piece of information that you need to pay attention to, Safaricom. We have seen a rally over the last couple of days, as well as net inflows from foreign buyers. What's happening there? The last price it closed at yesterday, 29.3. Now remember that Safaricom has a record date for its dividend, its normal dividend, as well as its special dividend, both of which are totaling to 1.97 shillings. The record date for this is 30th of this month. If you're not on the register by 30th of this month, then you're not going to get into this. Speaking to brokers and local investment practitioners, it seems that this rally is really driven by people who want to be able to lock in 1.97 in terms of dividend. And once this is done, then they'll actually begin to get out. So it actually seems that this rally that we have been seeing will be short-lived. But let's wait and see what happens at the end of the month. But if you haven't bought into the stock, maybe you still have some time till the end of the month, one more week, and you can be able to take part in the 1.97 dividend that the company will be paying out. We take a short break, and always remember, we are streaming live on YouTube as well as on our Facebook page, and that's Metropole TV. When we come back after the break, we will be discussing the telecom sector and getting a practitioner's perspective with regards to what is happening there. What is the utilization rate of the current infrastructure? And more importantly, what are the trends that are coming up in this sector, and how can you as an investor and also an individual be able to tap into some of the opportunities that are apparent? Mr. Chris Sananu, who's the Managing Director of the Enterprise Division at Telkom Kenya, will be with us and helping us demystify the opportunities, risks, and challenges in this sector. We take a short break on daily commodities. Don't go anywhere. See you shortly.